Hello, literature lovers, and welcome to 21 Conversations, the 2021 Greensboro Bound Literary Festival. I'm Dabney Sanders, board chair of the Greensboro Literary Organization. Greensboro Bound is so excited to present to you these 21 conversations, our effort to create something unique and special for our community within the confines of our continued virtual environment. 21 Conversations pays homage to North Carolina's rich literary history while broadening our tent to welcome in voices from outside of our own microcosm of experience. This featured presentation is but a taste of the 52 authors that we have gathered together in a series of delightful, sometimes unexpected, but always edifying conversations. Since our inception, Greensboro Bound has been committed to providing programs just like the one you are about to watch, 100% free to our community. And in order to do that, we need the financial support, both big and small, of readers just like you. Please support Greensboro Bound by giving now. The text to give phone number as well as our website are on your screen. A sustaining gift of just $15 a month, or the cost of a single children's book, will help us remain financially solvent throughout the year. I also want to take a moment to thank our sustaining supporters, without whom Greensboro Bound would not be possible. Our utmost gratitude to the Edward M. Armfield Senior Foundation, the Ruth Lands Memorial Fund, and Arts Greensboro for their continued belief in our vision to bring together readers and writers of all genres, ages, ethnicities, identities, and voices to foster an understanding of writing as a process that allows free expression, deepens critical thought, and helps sustain a culture of inquiry and delight that is open to all. Thank you again for joining us for the 2021 Greensboro Bound Literary Festival. Please enjoy the conversation.
We have all felt the sting of rejection or the pain of not fitting in. More than half of LGBTQ Americans have hidden who they are to avoid discrimination. We are here to make sure that everyone has a place where they feel welcome and safe. Find an affirming doctor, hairstylist, or plumber in our resource guide. Meet new friends at our takeovers. Get support at a program. Or stop by the center for a friendly chat. You can find your community here. Be a part of our life-saving work. Get connected, volunteer, and donate now.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Dr. Cynthia Greenlee. I'm here today with Greensboro Bound, the virtual literary festival. Virtual this year in my hometown of Greensboro, North Carolina. I'm happy to be here. And I'm extremely happy to be here with Dr. Roxane Gay and welcome her to this. It's funny, it's called Greensboro Bound because we're also bound to the places where we are right now. But I want to be sure that I give her a warm welcome, even though we're not here talking to each other face to face in the way we would like to. And so, I just want to do a little bit of an introduction for Dr. Gay. And I always like to make sure I get the doctor in there, right? Because people tend to drop it and it gets dropped a lot, especially when you are a person of color and Black woman. So I'm going to say it again, Dr. Gay. Um, so, I was trying to think, back when I first started reading um, Roxane Gay's work, and the only thing I can say is that it was back in the day, right? I can't even remember it. I think I started reading your work in the Rumpus, probably around 2013, and I followed her rise since then. And so, one of the reasons why I have followed Roxane Gay's work is that her portfolio shows that she has such a healthy disrespect for boundaries of genre and is a polymath student and teacher of various literary forms. And, I could go on about that all day, but I won't. But, I think of the really devastating beauty of, her memoir, Hunger. I think of the stunningly funny and cogent Bad Feminist. I think of the stories of compulsion in her collection, Difficult Women, and the slew of comics and graphic novels set in different worlds and dimensions. Her honors are appropriately many. National Book Award finalist, Penn Center USA Freedom to Write Award, a Guggenheim Fellowship, a Lambda Literary Trustee Award, becoming one of the first Black women to be a lead writer with Marvel Comics. And the list goes on and on and on. She's also the creator of media platforms, including the now defunct Gay magazine. And my cat is right here, and you will see so he is making an appearance. You can also see her unsolicited opinions in her much beloved Twitter feed, where I'm always amazed at how much she actually engages with people on Twitter, and her podcast, Here to Slay, with her co-host, Tressie McMillan Cotton. And most importantly, I think she might have one of the internet's cutest dogs. So I want to say, an official and warm welcome to you. Thank you, Roxane, for being here.
Thank you for having me and for that really kind introduction, Cynthia.
Yeah. So my dog may also make an appearance. So you never know whether you should leave them out or like put them in a room and whether they will throw a hissy fit. So so I guess let's just, kind of start with the obvious. What's your pandemic year been like? Your year inside?
My pandemic year has been good, surprisingly. I know that the world has been a mess, and I've certainly been writing about that, and I'm engaged with the world, but I'm very lucky, and I get along with my partner, and so this was the first time we were together full time because we're bi-coastal, and she is based out of New York and I'm based in Los Angeles. And so we decided to spend quarantine together. We had actually, a week before COVID shut everything down, decided we were going to start living together and going back and forth together. So this just accelerated our timeline, and it ended up being a delight. She's a lot of fun, and she's a great partner, and we get along well. We have enough room so that we're not all up under each other all the time, which goes a long way. And, the slowdown, even though it was pretty terrifying to like lose all of my income overnight, I had enough savings to get through a year. And so things are okay. And we're just taking it one day at a time, and I recently got vaccinated, so that is a huge relief. And I think it's, so far so good.
I know. I was thinking, I just said to someone the other day, the things I wanted most in life right now were a shot and a margarita in a restaurant. But, now we think of shot as vaccination and not like alcohol, right? It's
Right.
a sign of our times. Well, it's interesting, Roxane, that you said that, the bottom kind of fell out of your income because, I think we see you producing so much and getting so many accolades that I think we tend not to understand the writer's life and the economic realities of it. And can you talk a little bit about that?
Certainly. I I make a good living at writing, but until recently I always had a day job, and so I did not have to live off of my writing. And over the years, I started to do more speaking engagements, and frankly, I make more from public speaking than I do from writing. And when everything started to shut down, there were no more events because you certainly can't put 1 or 2,000 people in a room safely anymore. And hopefully that will change. Actually, it is changing already, but that meant that all the touring income disappeared. And there are repercussions because it not only affects me, it affects my speaking agents. and it affects, I have a staff, and fortunately I was able to keep everyone employed and without any pay cuts or anything, without a removal of benefits. And so I'm really glad for that, but it can be pretty precarious. And I hope that someday it doesn't feel so precarious, but that day is not here yet.
I'm hoping for a future that does not feel so precarious, even without the pandemic. So I'm
Yes.
wondering, has the pandemic changed your writing in like process, topic, or tone, or maybe changed the things that you're obsessing over a little bit?
It hasn't. My project before the pandemic remains my project now. And I just tend to follow my curiosity wherever it takes me. And I tend to comment on whatever interests me in the world, whether it's pop culture or politics or, anything in between. I think that what the pandemic has done is given me more time to think and read and really put more energy, not more energy, but I've just had more time. And at first I did not know what to do with that time. I do not do well with a lot of unstructured time. And so I did not get a lot done during the first few months of the pandemic. But once I got used to not traveling constantly, I used to be on the road almost every week. Um, I was able to finally find my literary ground, I think, and I started to write a little bit more and ended up writing a book or finishing a book. I'm actually doing the last sort of things with the book right now, and it will be out in November. And so, yeah, it's just been more time.
Mm. Is this a YA project that I know I saw maybe last year you were working on?
No, I worked on that too, and
Mhm.
I will be also finishing that in the next couple months, but it's a book of writing advice called How to Be Heard.
Ah, that makes me think. I was just talking to someone, a fellow writer, who asked me, I want to read a book about craft, about writing craft, and I want it to be written by a Black author. And we were going, back and forth. I asked a couple of authors who has written, what Black author has written a craft book, and we didn't turn up many or really any. And so I'm wondering about that kind of publishing economy. And, the thing that people have always recommended to me, and there's nothing wrong with this book for sure, but, I got a million recommendations of Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. And, which has been out there on the market for a while. So I'm wondering why it seems to be taking so long to get a Black craft book.
I think that there are a lot of reasons. Um, People tend to not think that marginalized writers are working from a place of craft. They think that our work comes from a place of emotion or only a place of emotion. And that's simply not the case. We use craft in absolutely everything we do, and that reaction that you have to our work is because of the craft. And so I think we're so busy writing about race and gender, sexuality, and those kinds of things that we don't have the space to write about other things. And we have plenty of other intellectual interests. Frankly, those are not my primary areas of inquiry, though they certainly influence everything that I do. And so, because publishing has such a narrow set of expectations for us, uh, being able to create a book on craft is not something that really figures into their calculus of what we can do. I think that's slowly changing. This year, an Asian American writer, Matthew Salisis, published a book called, oh my goodness, I'm so bad at titles. I'm gonna just look it up real quick because it's really
Feel
good.
free.
Craft
That's
in the Real World.
that's
Yeah,
good.
it's
Yeah.
called Craft in the Real World. And what he really does is rethink the entire workshop project and how we approach literary workshops, because the current system is very much grounded in white supremacy and does everything it can to deny Black voices, Asian voices, anyone who's a person of color. And so it's a great book. And I think that creative writing classes will be using it for decades to come. And hopefully we'll see more Black writers putting out books on craft in the near future. I think it's coming.
And how'd you land this assignment? Was this something you suggested, or did people
Yeah,
finally come to you? Okay.
no, this is something I pitched.
All right. Yeah, I had just talked to a bunch of writers who had seen your master class, and had been saying we would love to like have a tangible, like can hold it in the handbook, craft book,
Mhm.
Black writer. So glad to know that that will be coming.
Yeah, it will be a good companion to my masterclass, I think.
Okay, good. Um, so I wondered, Roxanne, like since you write in so many different genres and different registers, um, is there a form that feels like home to you?
Certainly, fiction is my first love, and it's definitely the genre that most feels like home. I love the way I can create worlds and also write the rules of that world. And when I write fiction, I tend to lose myself entirely in the story. And I originally started writing fiction for escape, and I found that incredibly satisfying. And unfortunately, some people don't even know I write fiction. For whatever reason, my nonfiction has been more popular, and I don't, begrudge that. But my fiction writing is actually better. So, in my opinion, but it's fiction, and I just love it, and I will always write fiction alongside my nonfiction.
Mm. I mean, yeah, I think your debut, Untamed State, was a novel. So, I mean, are there other pieces of your catalog that you wish people would pay more attention to?
I think people come to books when they come to them, but I really wish that people would read Ayiti, which was my very first book, and then Difficult Women and An Untamed State alongside Bad Feminist, Hunger, Not That Bad, because I think that they offer a different side of the range of things I'm capable of in the written word.
Mhm. Mm. You know, it strikes me, I've seen a lot of places where you recommended books, and that clearly you're a very Catholic, with small c, um, reader. And I'm wondering, um, because you have talked a little bit about reading a romance novel, if you would write a romance novel, or maybe you consider some of your writing to be kind of in the romance genre already.
I am working on a romance novel project. I can't talk about it, but it's going to be a lot of fun.
Ah, okay. I've been watching how the romance genre, continues to expand in lots of different ways. Whether, it's Jasmine Guillory's work or Alyssa Cole or so many of these folks, but also thinking about how the romance genre, if we're thinking about those skinny little Harlequin books, right? Um,
Mhm.
in so many ways, they're formulaic, but how they were so consumed by so many people, and the ways in which those novels very often hew to tropes around race and culture. Like, how many times do you see a skinny harlequin, that's like, her Italian lover or any of these things? But the romance novel has really blossomed. What
Yeah,
what about romance? What about romance novels has appealed to you?
I love escapism. I think it's just so, you know, I just love escapism. And I love the idea of a happy ending and true love. And romance novels give us that, which is incredibly satisfying. So it starts there. And um, yeah, it starts there. And frankly, it ends there. And right now we're seeing a real, I want to say, I don't want to say renaissance, but a real rise in romance novels from people who are not able-bodied white heterosexual people. And that's awesome. Jasmine Guillory, of course, is one. Alyssa Cole. We're seeing Helen Huang writes incredible romance novels about neuroatypical people, as does a woman. The novel I just read was called Get a Life, Chloe Brown. And there's a sequel that just came out, and I think her name is Talia Hibbard. And she also she writes in Get a Life, Chloe Brown, it's a romance novel about a woman with chronic pain. And it's so lovely. And to see like a different kind of body, and to see it treated with dignity, and to see the body treated with dignity, and to see this woman have the same hopes and dreams that anyone might have, and to see the issues she deals with factor into any sort of relationship that she might have with someone. It's outstanding.
Mm. I mean, what do you think? What do you think is driving this change?
Um, Demand. People want to see themselves represented, and they want representation that's not merely tokenistic. All too often, it is tokenistic, and it just sort of cherry picks very narrow ranges of experience. And people tend to assume, oh, I only need to do like one shallow thing, and that will be enough. And that's not the case. It's just not the case at all. So, we're just waiting to see more stories that reflect our realities, and to understand that we contain multitudes. That's the biggest thing. And then I mean, anyone who is not considered part of the main. And that's a lot of people. There are frankly more of us than there are of them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You write with a particular reader or audience in mind?
Not really. I tend to write the kinds of things that I would love to see in the world. And when people gravitate to those things that I create, it's um, just the bonus.
Mhm. I mean, that makes me wonder. Clearly, you've always been attracted to the word, and I heard in your masterclass that your parents brought you your typewriter and then a word processor, like one of those that automatically does that after you type the stuff, I'm guessing. But what would you be doing if you weren't writing books and essays and short stories? Like, what would you be doing professionally?
I just don't know. I really don't. When I was growing up, I wanted to be an ER doctor. I thought that would be a lot of fun. And um, I was pre-med in college, and then I realized this was not going to work. And so I abandoned that dream. So I think if I was going to do anything else, it would be medicine. But, um, the thing is, I always believed that I would be a writer, and I may have had a day job, but I was going to write. And so I didn't even allow for the possibility that I needed a backup plan beyond beyond the job.
Mm, what confidence, right?
Well, it's
So,
not confidence so much as it is
conviction.
conviction. And that's what I talk about this in my master class, and I talk about this in How to Be Heard. It's so important to give yourself the benefit of a day job, because the writing life is so precarious. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't try and go for it. You absolutely should, but you should make sure that you can take care of all of your needs, and pay your rent, your student loans, whatever. um, Support your family if you have to do something like that, which a lot of people of color, we do. So with that, I was able to have that sort of singular focus in my free time. And I also did not have children, which goes a long way to having the time to create. So, you know, I had a lot of support.
Mm, indeed. But now you have one of the cutest dogs on the internet.
I do. I
He-
do. My wife is a real dog person, and I've actually never had a dog before in my life. And for her birthday, I got her in October. I got her a puppy, and his name is Maximus Toretto Blueberry. And he's a lot of fun. The first few couple months were a lot of work. I was not prepared, um, but it was an adventure, and it still is. And now he's absolutely part of our little family, and it's good.
Does he actually eat blueberries?
No, no, I don't think he's ever had a blueberry. He likes red meat.
All right, carnivore. Uh, So, I mean, I had been seeing you kind of fall in love with him,
Mhm.
many people on social media, and so it made me think that maybe one day there's a dog love book somewhere, but um, somewhere because there's a whole genre of people writing about
There
dogs, how
is.
wonderful they are, right?
Yeah, there definitely will not be a book. There may be an essay. I may have something to say in terms of the essay form about um, just owning a dog and how surprising it is, and how he's a curious little creature. He's very smart. So there may be an essay, but I certainly do not have a book's length of um, stuff to say about this.
Indeed. So you write so much about love and also about trauma,
Mhm.
and so I'm wondering about like what the connection is between those two for you.
Between love and trauma.
Hmm.
For me, love is what has helped me to survive trauma, whether it's the love of family, the love of friends, or the love of a partner. When people are willing to hold you at your most fragile, when they're willing to stand by you during your most difficult times, you know that even though I've endured an unspeakable trauma, I have and I am so much more than that. And I think it's so important to talk about that. And I try to do so whenever I can.
Hmm. So one thing I think that a lot of writers grapple with is like how much to disclose of themselves. And I wondered about that with you because you write about, your thoughts, you write about, family history, you write about sexual violence, you write about feminism and social movements. And so, what's your process for figuring out how much you will reveal about yourself?
I have very firm boundaries and I just stick to them. And it's so important because when you write about yourself, you have to be prepared for people to comment on it and critique it. And they tend to not only critique the writing, they tend to critique your life choices. And so that's challenging. And so I know when I've put something into the world that I can handle people responding to it however they're going to respond to it. It may be difficult for me to handle, but I can do it. And so generally, my boundaries are around protecting the privacy of my loved ones. My wife did not ask to be a public figure, and so I mean, she kind of is in her own right, but she did not ask to have a spotlight on her. So I make very careful choices in writing about our life together. And I do the same with my parents, my siblings, my in-laws, my nieces and nephews. People know that they exist because they do, and I'm very proud of them. But there's nothing I would write about them that I could not share with them face to face, and that would harm the way that they move through their own communities. And there are just things I don't want to talk about, and so I don't.
Hmm. Um, that seems such a novel idea in a moment when people tend to talk about everything, uh,
Mhm.
especially on social media. Do you share work with your family that in work that mentions them even peripherally before publishing?
Do I share work with my family? Not really. I These days I do now give them a heads up if I think that there's something that they might raise an eyebrow at. But I also, like with Hunger, I asked them not to read it, but I told them what was in the book and what it was about. And I also brought them along on several tour events so that they could feel included. And they read all my work online. They do, whether I tell them to or not. They stalk me. My dad has Google alerts for me. And so, yes, they know about my work.
I was getting ready to say I could not imagine my mother um, heeding the don't Google me and don't look for me, right? Uh,
Yes. The only time they've heeded me was with Hunger. I asked them not to read it. I've always asked them not to read my work, and I don't know why, but yeah, the one that was I with that one I really just said, I assure you um, that you this is for you the best. You don't need to know certain things about me, but there's nothing in here that I'm ashamed of. So I think with that reassurance, it really helped them to stay away. But in terms of everything else, no, they're right there.
Hmm. Okay. Uh, and so going back a little bit, just thinking about how you move so much between different types of writing, like what's your process for learning a form you haven't written before?
I just read a lot in that genre or that form and sort of look at what are the best practices out there. And then I try my hand at it. And I try not to be too imitative. I'm not trying to imitate other writers, but sometimes you do need guidance with, for example, when I moved into comics, I looked at other scripts from other writers to just get a sense of how to structure a comic and how do you format a script for a comic book. Sometimes you just need to follow the leader in that regard. And then I just try to adapt it to my style and to think about, what would I bring to this genre and how would I bring it? And I try to answer those questions as best I can.
Mm, mm. And like to work on a comic or graphic novel, feels like a very different kind of team effort, especially when you're used to like essentially the single byline, right? Or single person authorship. And so I'm wondering how you make that transition, even though publishing is inherently collaborative in some ways. Like you have editors, you have, agents, you have publishers, but like the very direct work of working on panels with each other and story development, it seems like it would be very different to enter that world and also the world of visual storytelling.
Well, I have written all my comics alone. Um, and then I hand the script to the artist, and the artist then interprets the story. And with some comics, I get to actually give feedback on the art, and sometimes not so much. But I do always get to see it before it advances to the next stage. And then there's a colorist who puts the color on, and then the letterer. And so the having so many different people get to interpret and reinterpret what I started it with is really interesting, exciting. It's very different from publishing in some ways, but it's similar. Like you said, publishing is collaborative. So I like it. And then I did co-write a comic with my best friend. It's called The Sacrifice of Darkness.
Mhm.
And that one was interesting because I've never co-written something before. Oh, I had actually, I co-wrote a movie. Um, and so just trying to figure out how do we balance what we're each bringing to this project. And I always tried to defer to her, her judgment and to trust her judgment. And even when it was not something I would do, I would just remind myself, that's actually the point. That's why you have a collaborator. And I found it to be quite freeing, honestly. I have plenty of stuff I do on my own. So
Mhm.
I do not need to hoard all of the opportunities.
Mm, indeed. Um, and so just thinking about, kind of building community through writing.
Mhm.
Um, so how do you do that? Like, do you have friends that read your work?
No. My wife reads my work, and I have a couple people if I need advice or guidance or just some a little feedback on something that I'll share my work with. But I am not. I used to be in a writing group many years ago when I was teaching at Eastern Illinois University, and it was a wonderful, wonderful writing group, and they really helped my work. And I miss them quite a lot. And that was the only time I've actually ever been in a writing group in my whole life. And so that was very interesting. But I don't have a writing group now, and I am not one of those people who like is going to have beta readers or things like that. Like I'm grown, and you're not doesn't mean you're not grown if you use those tools. It's just not for me. And part of the reason is just logistics. I am a last minute Lucy when it comes to work, and I test deadlines mightily. And so I don't have time in my process to do a lot of readership before I send it off. But I also have really good editors. So it's not like my work goes directly from me onto the page and into publication. My editors do actually edit my work. And so having them engage with my work so richly and give me such outstanding feedback is really great. And I tend to take almost all editorial suggestions. I think I've turned down fewer than 5 in my entire career.
Seriously?
Yeah, seriously, which always surprises people, but I know that editors are there for a reason and that they can see things that I may not. And, when you work with really good editors, it's very easy to trust their suggestions. And I also turn in clean copies. So,
Mm.
uh, I know that if they're making a suggestion, it needs to be made. And I can't say enough about having great editors.
Mhm. I noticed that you talked about how, you got this piece of very valuable advice from a teacher, which is, write every day. But I'm wondering, after having worked with such good editors, if you now have um, if you have gotten good advice from editors that you really take with you as you continue to create.
Nothing specific comes to mind, but the best advice that I always get from editors is to not overwrite the points that I'm trying to make. I can get quite enamored with a cadence or an idea and really sit in there. And my editors are very good at telling me it's time to pull this back. And so the best advice I ever get is about when and where to pull back, and to just trust that, first of all, to trust the reader that they're going to get my point, and to trust that I don't need to obsessively go after a point. That's not the way to do it. Sometimes less is indeed more.
Mhm. Mm. Can you tell us how you got your first book published?
Yeah, I published my first book with Micropress, and um, yeah, I published my first book with a micropress. A friend of mine was running this press called not, that was my press, called Artistically Declined Press. And he asked if he could publish a book with me. And so I looked at my work and realized that I had assembled a body of work about the Haitian diaspora experience.
Mhm.
And so I put it together in a book called Ayiti. And he published, I think the first run had 25 or 50 copies, no, maybe 100. And so it was truly a micro press, and there was no money in it. And the book ended up being re-released by my fiction publisher, Grove Atlantic. And so it has a second lease on life right now, which I'm very grateful for.
Mhm. And so there's so many different paths in publishing, right?
Mhm.
Um, would you recommend a micropress as a way to start, without totally determining for people like the path, that there is no one?
Uh, I don't know that I would. I think it can be a great experience, and it's a very intimate experience, and you have, I think, a lot more say over certain aspects of your book, but there's very little publicity. I mean, I think people who run micropresses do the best they can with very few resources, but you have to be prepared for that. And you have to be willing to do a lot of the work that will happen in publishing houses with other people, like publicity and setting up tours and things like that. And, even when you're with the big five, sometimes you have to do that work yourself. So you just have to be prepared for anything when you get into publishing. But I do think that everyone should shoot their shot and go with either, large or small presses or one of the imprints at the big five. Um, I think that, yeah, shoot your shot.
Mm. I mean, what do you think was surprising to you or shocking to you? I know lots of folks were very surprised to see how much or how little you were paid for one of your first books as part of the hashtag publishing paid me. But like, what do you wish you knew before you got into this business of being a professional writer?
I'm sorry, what was the last part of the question?
Yeah. What do you wish you had known before getting into this business as a professional writer?
I think I wish I had known just what the range of possibility was for advances. I just had no idea. And, when you read Publishers Weekly and things like that, you get really fancy ideas about, oh my God, I'm going to get $500,000. There's going to be a 6-play bidding war and I'm going to get 7 figures. And so I wish that people would offer just more information. And that's why I talk about my advances. I think it's important for people to know the reality of what most writers make. And I did make less even than that, but I still earned royalties. And so it ended up paying off. And there were other trade-offs that I also talk about. I have toured every book I've ever written, and at the publisher's expense. And in many ways, that's going to be infinitely more valuable to you than a big advance, because I have found that touring is incredibly useful. It's not useful for everyone, but I move a lot of books through touring. And to have that kind of publisher support, especially for Bad Feminist and Untamed State, was invaluable. And you can't put a price on something like that.
Mm. And how much did you have to shop around your books?
My first book, An Untamed State, I shopped around for more than a year and a half, and it went through 2 revisions. And Bad Feminist sold almost immediately, and I sold Hunger before I wrote it. And same with my next 3 books. I sold just with an idea.
Okay.
I mean, I wrote proposals, but yeah.
Right. All right. Is that typical-ish?
No, and I don't recommend it. I mean, it can be great in that you know what you're working toward, but it becomes a lot of pressure when publishers are like, okay, where is this manuscript you promised us 3 years ago? And it's like, I just don't know. And so I have these like 4 books I need to write, and I'm going to write them, but I wish I don't know what I was thinking selling them like that. But it'll be okay. I just don't recommend it. So maybe 1, but don't do more than 1.
So what is the calendar for somebody who has 4 books they are obligated to write? Like, what does that look like?
I wish I could tell you, but I don't know. I work quite a lot, and fortunately I like what I do, but work is work. And, I just miss deadlines. That's the truth of it. And I'm not proud of it, and I'm trying to get better about it. But I have a really hard time saying no. It's more than just sort of bringing this on myself. I just can't say no. And sometimes when I say no, people come back to me, and it's like, it's not a negotiating tactic. I'm genuinely saying no as a complete sentence. And, it takes so much energy for me to get to a place where I can actually say no. And so when someone comes back with a rejoinder, I get really flustered, and sometimes I go back on my own no, because it just feels like it's easier to just give in and give them like whatever they want. And so then I end up in the situation I'm currently in, which is, a good problem to have, but where I'm literally drowning in work, because I don't not only have my books, I have my comic, I have my podcast, I have film and television projects, and I actually write all of my own work. And so there's no like magic little room of ghostwriters. Um, like a James Patterson, which, great guy, whatever. No judgment there. But like, this is all self-produced. I do fortunately have help. I have a research assistant, and I have an executive assistant. And my executive assistant works full time. And
Mm.
I am about to hire her an assistant. So I have the resources to do the work that I do, and not everyone does. And so, and there have been points in my career where I did not either. And so I try to never take it for granted, as overwhelmed as things currently are.
Mm. Do you write things that are just for pleasure, that are never meant for publication?
No, I do not. I do write things for pleasure and not know where they're going to end up, certainly. But I publish everything I write.
Oh, wow. Okay. So the cat is like going to throw his feet. So here he is.
Mhm,
So, um, so what about like bad writing advice? There's a lot of it out there.
mhm,
Writing advice is so individual, right?
mhm.
What people need. But what have people told you that you just felt free to dispense with?
A lot of the bad writing advice I've heard has been about just like, all first drafts are terrible, and like this idea of worshiping at the altar of revision. And I write about this in How to Be Heard.
Mhm.
First drafts are flawed, but I think that it's important for writers to trust their initial instincts. And I think there's a lot of really exciting stuff that happens in a first draft, and I wish more people would respect the first draft, because um, that's where you are your most unfiltered and where you take the most risks.
Mm.
And it's when you go to revise that you start to pull back and worry about the risks you may have taken on the page. And so I always want to encourage writers um, to trust their first drafts, while also making sure that you are able to take that second and third look at your work to make sure that it's the best that it can be, and that you've truly tried to rethink your ideas, so that you can know that you're putting the best work possible into the world.
Mm. Mhm. And so, what does taking risks look like for you?
It can look like a lot of different things, trying different ways of writing, writing from different points of view. Like with my novel, for it may not be like a risk in the grand scheme of things, but I decided to write from multiple points of view and to write like both in first and third person. And, that felt risky because it's not done a lot. And yet it was really exciting and I loved doing it, so that you could have the intimacy of the first person, but also the God's eye view of the third person and the omniscient narrator. And then, sometimes it's just making an argument that feels risky, or where you have an opinion or a perspective that people are going to take issue with, and you know that going in, but you say it anyway. And I think that's these days where I take the most risks.
Mhm. I have to say that one of my favorite pieces of your writing is actually a piece that I felt like was a little, I could see a lot of risk in it, was the banks.
Yeah.
And um, and that, you are, for folks who don't know, it is a lovely, lovely um, graphic novel about a family of women who are engaged in a criminal enterprise. And it shows a Black family that has expertise in an area that is typically not valued, right? And is also criminalized, but shows a love there. There's a love story. There are multiple love stories within the story, and it's incredibly complex. And I wondered where that story came from.
The My comics publisher that I'm currently working with, TKO Studio, they just gave me a one line, um, a family of thieves, three generations of thieves. That's it. And so I just built the story from that.
How do you build a world like this, right?
One step at a time. But I knew I wanted to write about Black women, and I knew that I wanted each generation to have an interesting story, and I knew that I wanted to set it in Chicago, and because I think that there are cities other than New York and Los Angeles, and yet you still needed a city for something like this to work. And so Chicago was really a great fit. And then I just took it from there. And I thought, how would three generations of a family, and women at that, get involved in becoming master thieves? And so, you just start with a thread, and then you keep on building and building and building. And then you've, woven something, hopefully, that's really good.
It seems like it's absolutely ready made for film adaptation.
It is. We are working on that right now.
Oh, great. I will be there to see it for sure. So that actually got me to thinking about like the place in your books.
Mhm.
And so, thinking about, you've written about, Michigan, you've written about Chicago, you've written about so many different places, real and imaginary. And so I'm wondering about the role of the Midwest, particularly in your books. What about the Midwest is draws you?
Um, I'm from the Midwest. I was born in Omaha, Nebraska. And so I know that it is an interesting, complicated place, and it has certainly shaped a lot of who I am. And so I like to talk about that. And I always try to acknowledge, like this is where I come from, because it matters.
It does. And so for writers who don't either come from the big cities or publishing meccas, I mean, there are plenty of writers who are probably going to watch this here in North Carolina and beyond. Um, and I think very often writers are told that not being in New York is a real disadvantage. I'm wondering how you navigated your career being in places that weren't necessarily, publishing city.
Yeah, listen, it's absolute nonsense that you're at a disadvantage if you don't live in New York. Literally 90% of writers don't live in New York, if not more. It's such a small fraction. And I think it's so damaging that this myth persists because it allows so many writers to talk themselves out of a career before they even try to embark on one. The internet has made a lot of things possible. And the reality is that you can become a writer from anywhere, and you can also feel connected to the literary community through social media, if you choose to engage with it, through online publications, through, especially now, all of these events that we can attend virtually, which I'm ready for them to stop, but
Yeah.
I've been thinking a lot about access, and a lot of people with disabilities who are homebound for whatever reason have really enjoyed being able to see plays and concerts and conversations like this from home, and to not feel left behind or left out. And so I do think we also have to think about, like, how do we continue to make art and culture accessible to people outside of major urban centers? And this is a question I think that we've long had to deal with. And I also hope that we find ways to continue to demystify what it takes to be a writer. Certainly, if you want to move to New York and live in a little Brooklyn apartment with 4 other people and, go through that struggle, live your truth. But you can also just live in your town where you can live in a beautiful, large apartment or home for a reasonable amount of money, and not have to be crowded into a city, then or at least into that city. It's totally possible, and you'll be fine. So I think demystification is like the main thing we got to do there.
I think it is totally possible. I am living that life. I live in central North Carolina. I will say that last year I won a little bit. I won an award. I won a James Beard Award for food writing, which is kind of like an Emmy or something like that. And within 5 minutes, I had emails saying, "So, are you going to move to New York? Really, to like follow your career?" And I was like, "No, I'm not going to move to New York. I mean, New York is great for visits occasionally, but it's not the center of my universe." And many writers know that it doesn't have to be, but many still are laboring under that myth, right? That you have to be in the big city to, make it big as a writer.
Absolutely. And you don't. You can make it big anywhere. And I think it's also important to recognize that success as a writer can look a lot of different ways. And it doesn't necessarily mean at the top of the bestseller list. Most of us are never going to get there. And that's okay. Um, for me, success always was going to be write a book worthy of being published and then maybe find an audience. And anything that exceeded that has been thrilling. I really should have actually had a little bit more imagination, but I didn't. And so every day something new happens and I'm like, oh, I didn't even know this was a possibility. And it's delightful. And so I think because I had, I guess, modest expectations of what success would be, I can still feel pleasure at achieving things. And I think that's a really healthy way to go about it. But, at the same time, dream big. I want to win a Pulitzer. So, I do also have big dreams.
Mhm. And what's bringing you joy right now?
My puppy certainly is bringing me joy. I have been reading a lot of incredible books. One of the main ways that I kind of got through this all was reading. And just there's some astonishing literature being published right now. I've just
You're,
finished Prophets
you're
by
doing
Robert
something.
Jones.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I just finished The Prophet by Robert Jones Jr., which is just magnificent. And so that's bringing me a lot of joy. And then, of course, my wife is bringing me a lot of joy. She's a lot of fun, and we have really great days.
Okay. Are there things in the pop culture world that are circling in your brain you're thinking about?
Um, yeah, always. I'm trying to remember. Oh, I just watched Watchmen, and that really blew my mind. And um, I'm still mulling it over because it was so nuanced and layered and complicated and just beautifully done. And
Mhm.
Regina King is an absolute revelation in that show. So,
Does
uh,
she ever do anything terrible?
no, she does not. Her most recent film, One Night in Miami, is also incredibly good. And I enjoyed it. And I thought she was robbed of a Best Director nomination.
No, and I have loved her ever since she was Brenda on 227.
Yeah, I forgot about that, but yeah, she's been in the game for a minute.
I
She was
know, right?
also Cuba Gooding Jr.'s wife in uh, I call it Show Me the Money, Jerry Maguire.
Yeah. Mm, I totally forgot about that, but she really has been around for more than a hot minute. So,
Hmm.
mm, that kind of longevity is something that is, not common for sure.
Absolutely.
Well, any other pop culture obsessions right now?
No, not well. Yesterday I watched the Sound of Metal.
Oh,
That
what is that?
it's a movie starring Riz Ahmed, and
Mhm.
it's about a drummer who starts to lose his hearing, and he's also an addict in recovery. He's been in recovery for 4 years, and it's how he learns um, to cope with that.
Mhm. Sounds like a great human story. So,
Hmm.
all right. Well, I know that we are reaching about our time period. So, is there anything that, you want that come up for you want to say that we haven't talked about?
No, I think we've covered a good deal of territory today.
I know, right? So I'm going to close this out, but I want to say thank you so much for Roxane Gay for sparing your time and talking about writing and books and things you love and the writing life with us today. And I hope that you all who are watching, when you see this, come to Greensboro Bound and watch other events, and because it's a lovely festival, and maybe next year we will get to do it in person and see each other. So thank you, Roxane. Thank you for all of the Greensboro Bound folks who are doing this, and thank you for all of you people who are watching.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Thank you again for joining us for 21 Conversations. If you enjoyed this presentation, please like and share with your friends and fellow readers. One final reminder that Greensboro Bound is a nonprofit organization committed to bringing together readers and writers throughout the year at zero cost to our community. Please help Greensboro Bound maintain that commitment with a sustaining or one-time gift now. The number to text to give and our website are on your screen. Thank you. We look forward to seeing you in person next year at Greensboro Bound.